Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, Connecticut's own British-born, award-winning author Gabi Coatsworth. Gabi's memoir, Love's Journey Home, was published last month. It's a deeply personal and poignant account of her decades-long relationship with her husband Jay, their romance and separation, and the unexpected reconciliation that came when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Gabi has also written short stories and essays. Her first women's fiction novel is currently out on submission, and she's also trying her hand at writing a cozy mystery. A champion of her fellow authors, Gabi facilitates writers' meetups, currently online, and runs virtual Write-In Mondays, which you can find out more about at GabiCoatsworth.com. Her blog won 2019 awards from both the CT Press Club and the NFPW and is dedicated to all things writerly. Book Nation by Jen named Love's Journey Home one of the 11 best new memoirs of 2022. The book has quickly become beloved by readers, many of whom find its story of reality and redemption to resonate. Further, Book Life Reviews noted many readers will connect. Coatsworth shares her story with candor, wisdom, and heart, and lays bare her feelings about facing challenges with rare vulnerability. Now, Gabi Coatsworth reveals how she endeavored to capture her truth and render it boldly and beautifully on the page.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. I am delighted to be in conversation with award-winning author Gabi Coatsworth today. Her new memoir, Love's Journey Home, is available right now. Welcome to the show, Gabi.
Well, thank you so much for having me, John. It's a real pleasure to actually sort of see you in real life, having known you so much on social media.
I know, it's so funny. I feel like we've been circling each other for years and years and years, and yet this is probably our first, real-time interaction, which is thrilling. And I'm so excited to have you here because this is, such a compelling, powerful, and very poignant book. And I think that people are going to find that they can probably relate to it on many different levels. And I just wanted to start, with the title, because Love's Journey Home, it's a very sort of nuanced, multi-textural title. So if you can use that as a point of reference to give us an idea sort of the physical and emotional experience or journey that people will take with you through this book, if you wouldn't mind breaking it down to its essence for us.
Okay, so Love's Journey Home is probably like the fifth title that I came up with for the book. But I was thinking about the story, which is about how I fell in love with the man I eventually married back in 1974 when I was very young and living in London, and he was living in the United States. And so obviously this wasn't going to go anywhere. And eventually we sort of realized that and didn't see each other for 5 years. And in the meantime, I was offered a 6-month job in Chicago. So I said, yes, what could be nicer than going to Chicago for 6 months? Great chance to be in the States. And I went, and I was divorced at that point with 2 little children, fairly small, 7 and 10. And off we went for 6 months. And as time passed, I ran into Jay again, actually in Hong Kong, which you'll have to read the book. And he lived in Connecticut still, and he started visiting Chicago rather regularly. So to see me. So when my boss said, look, can you stay longer? I thought to myself, I don't know where any of this is going, but I went, okay. And so I did. And 4 years later, Jay and I married, and I came to live in Connecticut. And then, but, so it's a story full of separations and getting back together again. And I think that where I came out at the end was that I was home, and the story of my love and the love of my life and the man that I love had sort of come home to the right place at the end.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. And I did want to ask you too, because as we gather from you, explaining the sort of the origins of your relationship with Jay, I mean, it seemed like something that there were many, many obstacles. Like you said, oh, this probably isn't going to go anywhere. We're living on separate continents. We each have families of our own. But ultimately, it turned into a long marriage. And I wanted to ask you, about the power of the written word, because you really sort of bonded your relationship through letters, because this was before cell phones, before text messages, email, social media, and letters really are an art form. So can you talk about how specifically, writing letters back and forth, mailing them internationally, how that helped you to cement what ultimately did become your relationship and marriage?
Well, I feel so grateful that there were no emails when I was falling in love and so on, because emails come and they sort of go, and they're typed. So letters are handwritten, and there is something about that. You're writing a bit slower, you're really thinking about what you're writing, and your character comes through in the letters. Jay's certainly did. My husband Jay's letters, and I would look for them every morning, and he didn't write every single day, but almost every day. And then I'd be rereading them. I knew some of them by heart after a while, which was quite, and that way I really felt that I was getting to know him and who he was and what he thought. And this was in addition to phone calls, although not many phone calls when we were on separate continents, because they were very, very expensive then.
Right.
So, so the letters were something that really sustained me when we were apart. And then after I wrote this memoir, I didn't look at the letters again while I was writing the memoir. Because they were a bit too painful, a bit too raw to go back to that. But at the end of it, I thought to myself, I need to get more of Jay's voice in here, really. And I thought, how can I do that? And I suddenly remembered the letters. And it was very bittersweet to reread them. But the fact is, I still have them now. So I've always got him and his voice here, which is a lovely thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, what a beautiful, gift to have. And unfortunately, in today's age, a lot of that is missing for people because it just exists digitally. And do we really take the time to, print things out, save them as we should? Probably not.
No, and I think some people are writing in emojis, which is really, really just a little dicey sometimes.
That's very true. I can only imagine how people would interpret my communication, a few decades from now. God only knows what communication will look like then. I don't know. I shudder to think. But, to keep in the theme of writing, I did want to ask you, what people should understand about this book. Yes, it is, the book of a marriage, of a relationship, of a separation and a reconciliation, but also, you experienced Jay's terminal illness with him every day, and you were sort of writing throughout that when you could. So keeping that writing in mind, I'm wondering if you can tell us, when dealing with his illness and the emotions that come along with that, how the writing served you then, and then now in hindsight in the development of this book, because I'm sure it served a different purpose then versus now.
Well, as you know, I had the previous experience of my sisters. Two of my sisters had died, and I had not done as much writing when that happened, and I regretted it, because although I remember a lot when I start writing, but I knew that I had very precious limited time with Jay, and I didn't want to forget anything. Mm-hmm. So I started just to write short stuff to remind me of things. And partly, when somebody is sick, you may or may not do this, but you're taking notes. Right. Like a crazy person, so that you don't forget what the doctors said or whatever. And so these were the reasons that I started to write. And I'm very glad I did, because I had those as a basis for that part of the book. I did have other journals, but they went back quite a bit further, and there was an awful lot of whining in them. Stuff like, oh, I didn't get to the gym today, or, Right. And so they weren't very useful, frankly, in writing the book, and I've been throwing them away. But yeah, no, it helped me to get my feelings on paper because I didn't want to tell Jay everything I was thinking. I was trying to protect him, and at the same time, he was trying to protect me. And I didn't discover that till some time later. But I think that was one way that we were being loving to each other, was we both knew, and we both knew we knew, because you know someone really well.
Right.
But we worked on the positive stuff, the loving stuff, and that was really a gift.
Absolutely. And let me ask you too, you write something like this and it's very powerful, but it's also very personal, and it sort of necessitates you taking or exposing private experiences and emotions to a very public audience. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how you endeavored to balance candor or telling the truth of your experience, with then also being sensitive to other people who have stakes in this story, because there are children, there are grandchildren, friends. So, I mean, I think writing something like this must take a lot of courage, but how do you balance the need to tell, an emotional truth that you experienced with also taking into account everybody else's, feelings and consideration?
Right. Well, you can tell that I'm English, right? So first of all, we don't do feelings, we just don't. But as I started to write this, I have a writing critique group, friends of mine that I show things to. And at one point, I remember very clearly saying, I can't write anymore. I just can't. Somebody told me I have to bleed on the page. I can't. And they said, why don't you just write it as if no one's ever going to read it? Mm. And that's what I did. So I wasn't writing it for publication. And I didn't show it to anybody in the family before I published it. Mm. I showed it to other people who didn't know me to get their feedback. And so I was a little concerned when I published it that, for example, my daughter, who as a teenager was something of a hellion, might not be thrilled when she read the book. But as it happened, she loves this book and she tells her friends to buy it, and so on and so forth. And this hellion has turned into a wonderful teacher now. But I wasn't sure how she would take it. As for my grandchildren, their reaction was, how many times is my name in the book? And they're not reading it. They just want me to say. And so I wrote it as honestly as I could, and I wanted to get at the truth of the situation. So, and my stepdaughters, who might have been the ones who were anxious or whatever about the book, also like it, though it's hard for them to read about their father's last few months, because that is a difficult time for them. Absolutely. So, understandably.
Absolutely. It's a great point you make, because I think especially when you're writing memoir, like this, you can find so many reasons to not write, so many excuses not to, if you're considering everybody's feelings. So I think, would-be writers out there need to maybe keep that in mind, your honest truth, and you can't show it to everybody. Or
well, and here's the other thing. When I started writing, I was really feeling quite angry, because I was angry that Jay had died. I was angry that my life had changed completely and that I had no control over anything. And that was coming across in the writing, in the first draft. So I was happier when I went back to revise it, and I went, oh no, you're being too hard on some people here for no reason. They hadn't done anything wrong. It was me, So yeah, I think it came out to be, I think it represents me and how I feel about things well, and I've tried to be as honest as I can. So
sure. And let me ask you too. So I'm wondering, now that you've gone through the process of writing and rewriting, this book into what we see today, how has that served you? Was it catharsis? Did it just help you to sort of, take census of what you went through? What did you get out of this personally?
So after Jay died, I said to myself, look, did you imagine this? Was it really this great love that had lasted all these years and just been a little buried here and there and so on? Is this just you making it up, deciding that that's your story. I needed to answer that question for myself. And the only way I could do it was to go back and look at it all the way through. And of course, it's true that when I first fell in love with him, the good old sex appeal was quite a factor. But the fact is that there was more to it than that. And that was what kept us together for so long. Even though at one point, because of his drinking, I did decide that I couldn't live with him anymore. But when he got sick, as you know, I knew I would regret it if I didn't go back to look after him. And it was one of those, yes, I have to do that things. So I needed to sort that out. And yes, I did sort it out. Sure. And then I hesitated to publish because I thought that would be drawing a line underneath my life sort of thing and saying that part is all over. But of course, it's never really over because you live with everybody that you've ever known and loved. They're always with you.
Absolutely. And, I think too, so many people in a situation like this feel completely alone, like nobody will ever understand, what they're going through. And while that's true, and each situation like this is its own unique experience, there are some commonalities. And I have to tell you, I resonated, with your story on many levels. And one of them, probably the most strongly, is my parents sort of had a very similar relationship in the sense that my father was quite fond of alcohol. And, it reached a point where it went from like congenial to combative, you cross that line. And so my parents separated, never officially divorced, were really good friends. We did holidays together and vacations together. It's just they couldn't live in the same house. I mean, my dad literally lived a street over. There was property that connected the houses. Yeah. They couldn't live together. They did better, in separate homes. And then it turns out, he himself had a terminal cancer diagnosis, and my mom spent a lot of time caring for him during that process, and sort of came to the realization that she knew that, she always loved him. She just hadn't realized that she was still in love with him until they had that very intense experience together. And I think it really is one of those things that you feel like no one will relate to or understand until you read a book like Love's Journey Home.
So I love that you told me that. I'm so pleased that it's resonated in that way, because people react to different parts of the book, I've discovered. Some people are fascinated with the being a working woman in the 70s. Some people are, one 84-year-old friend of mine said, I had an affair with a married man too, which I wasn't expecting. Somebody else said, oh yes, I remarried and my teenage kids were hell, And so it's various parts of the book that appeal to people, and I think, and that's lovely for me. I'm very glad if it helps.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And I think, again, you hesitate to put something out in the world because you don't know how it's going to be received. And then you find that all of these people are sort of sharing some aspects of this experience with you. But, speaking of that experience, I did want to ask you, living those last times with Jay, what did you discover or rediscover, about him and maybe about yourself that you now will always take with you, that was sort of a direct result of being in that very intense and intimate situation together?
I think I did. I think what I learned was that, and came to realize, was that the bond that we had was actually unbreakable. In spite of everything, we had stretched the relationship to almost to its limits, but it had never broken. And I was so grateful to find that out and to know that, so that I didn't have questions like, did he ever really love me? Because yes, one of the things that happened was that when he got sick, he couldn't drink anymore, and he turned right back into the guy that I had fallen in love with. The man was still there, right, just being a bit hidden behind the glass of whatever vodka, So I was really glad to know that love can survive if you want it to, if both people want it to. And I couldn't be more grateful. It sounds awful, but somebody asked me whether I would have gone back if Jay hadn't been sick. And I said, I don't know. If he'd still been drinking, I don't know. But I'm so glad I didn't have to find out.
Right. And then you go through this experience and you have sort of a completely different perspective on things. And I wanted to ask you too, something I really like about this book is it honors, so many people. I mean, it honors Jay and his legacy, your families, your friends, the medical, professionals who helped to take care of him. But also something I think it does is it shines a bit of a light on caretaking and primary caretakers who are going through something like a hospice situation that is really, really intense. And that's something that, that you lived and then that you share with us. And I'm wondering, if you can speak to why you wanted to share those experiences and what you hope that other people in a similar situation might gather from that.
Well, it was an extremely intense experience, as it is for anybody who's doing that. And one of the hardest parts of it is feeling exhausted, because when you're exhausted, your patience is gone. Your ability to be kind can feel like it's slipping away. And all you want to do is to say, stop being sick just for 24 hours so that I can, go away and do something fun. And that was one of the most difficult things. And it wasn't Jay that was keeping me there. He'd say, go on, go and do something fun. But I couldn't, because there were for various reasons, including the fact that we were living in a somewhat isolated place, beautiful, but somewhat isolated in New Hampshire. And it was getting to be winter. So everything was a bit treacherous. And, eventually I managed to find someone through the hospice services who would come and sort of babysit. In other words, be there in case Jay needed anything while I was gone. And I didn't do it very often, but so one of the stories is that when it came to Valentine's Day, I asked Jay what he was going to get me for Valentine's Day. And he said, I obviously wasn't going anywhere. He was in bed. And so I went off and I bought a ring for him to give me, which was lovely. And I did do that. And I'm so glad I did it, because I'll never forget all of that. The going to buy it, the whole thing, his face when he said, you want a charm for your bracelet? I said, no, I don't want a charm, with a nice ring. And when he saw it, he went, oh yes, that's perfect. So finding a little time so that you're not exhausted all the time. You're going to be very tired, because it's emotionally tiring as well as physically. But and also simplifying the process of telling your friends. This was something that I found incredibly difficult. I could not take several phone calls a day with people asking me, and I know they cared. Right. It was just that it was, so I found this online site, and there are a couple of them, but this one was called Care Pages, where I could post an update and people could comment, but I only had to do it once, and then all my friends could check it. And so that was a wonderful thing, because otherwise I think I knew that people cared because they were staying in touch, but I was too tired to talk to everybody. So this was, modern technology has offered some wonderful things in times of disaster, which wouldn't have happened otherwise, including something like this interview.
Right. No, it's absolutely true. And, another aspect I related to was the caretaking aspect, because I've been a primary caretaker to my mom for, over 6 years now. Different situation, but I was also a secondary caretaker to my brother when he was in his own hospice situation. And unless you've been in that situation, it really is, hard to understand. But also, as a caretaker, it takes so much of your emotional being and your physical being. And like you said, sometimes you start to feel like you're losing your humanity, and 99.9% of the time, you can absolutely be on your game. And it's that 0.1% of the time that always kind of, sticks in your mind and nags at you. And then you read a book like this and you realize it's everybody. And we're sort of just predisposed to think about the things we think that we did wrong, or maybe the feelings.
Well, yes. Because, you worry that if you get something wrong, you'll really do some damage.
Yeah,
the other thing, if you give the wrong medication at the wrong time or something. So there's that anxiety, and also just the anxiety about someone being so sick and being your responsibility. And feeling that I always felt, what more could I do? What can I do more? And the fact is, I think I did do everything that I could do looking back. But you're doubting yourself as you go along, which is, tough.
Absolutely. And like you said, until you take an undertaking like this and actually really do look back and revisit your efforts, a lot of times you can't appreciate or understand, all that you did. And I have to say, I really appreciate your point about technology making things easier too, because I remember, when my mom was at her sickest, everybody wanted updates. And when I learned that I could copy and paste the same text and send it to everybody separately, that was a good day.
Yes. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
And then it's like, why didn't I realize that 2 years ago, John? But, anyway, let me ask you too, because you did share that story about Valentine's Day where you went out and you bought yourself a beautiful ring and now you have that memento, but you gave Jay, a really beautiful Valentine's Day experience too. Would you mind sharing that? Because I just read it and thought, how wonderful is that?
So here we are in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire, and I thought, I've got to do something. It's going to be his last Valentine's Day, and I'm not letting it pass unnoticed. And I looked in the local paper. I was just flipping through it, and there was an advertisement for a singing Valentine. Now, the last time I'd done something like that was in the early 80s or late whatever, and it was a French maid who came and sat on someone's lap, at the house and sang a song. And I thought, well, I'm not sure that's quite it. But what this turned out to be was a barbershop quartet. And so I phoned up the guy, and he came and he said, yes, we'll bring some chocolates and we'll bring a rose and we'll take a photograph. And I was like, okay. And they said, we get there no matter rain or snow or anything else. We're from New Hampshire. So, okay. So they showed up. And they were lovely, different shapes and sizes and different voices, of course. And I had said to them that I didn't want it. I wanted something that was romantic and not too, sort of hot, as it were. So they came in and they sang some wonderful old songs. They stood around the end of Jay's bed, and Jay was irritated when I first said he had to get a little bit dressed up, because he said, why? I never have to get smartened up. And I said, yes, you do. And they came in. And so I felt that they were expressing something in a romantic and kind way, and that Jay really knew that I was doing this for him. And then they said, okay, now we take the photograph. And one of them whipped out took the photograph and then took out a little printer and plugged it into the wall and printed the photograph, which was really very sweet, And again, it was an unforgettable day. And so when I posted a photograph on this Care Pages thing for people to see, and Jay's cousin in Minnesota wrote and said, we know people are in love when they're having way more fun than they should be having in a situation like this. And that was true,
Absolutely. I mean, what a beautiful experience to have together. And, you say at times you question, do we still love each other or not? And then you do something like that and you realize only people who truly love each other are going to give each other that kind of experience. So to move away from this book and sort of broach more general territory, I did want to ask, people also know you for your short stories, your essays. So you write a lot of things, not just memoir, and this includes fiction. Can you talk a bit about, how these disciplines are similar, how they differ, but also how you find that writing one may influence your approach to writing another when you have that experience of having, done multiple genres?
Well, some of the early stuff that I wrote was in fact stories about Jay, because he was quite hilarious in some regards. And so I would write funny stories about him that somebody picked up and put in an anthology, which was very nice. So I had that habit, but I also wrote short stories, and some of those went into anthologies, which was great. And that was as far as I got. Oh, no, it's not quite true. I have 2 terrible novels sitting in a drawer here that I was really trying hard, but it wasn't working out. And so then came the pause while Jay was ill, and I wasn't writing anything except, what was going on. But afterwards I wrote the memoir, and then I sent it off to an editor to have someone look at it. And while I was waiting, I decided, okay, I'll write a novel. Why not? I'll try another novel. And I did. And so the thing that I learned from writing memoir was that if you write by hand, you'll remember more, you'll visualize more, and your hand will keep up with your brain and your memory as you go. And so whenever I had a scene in the novel where I needed more emotional heft, for example, I would write that scene by hand. And sure enough, I was able to get inside their feelings, not just their heads. I'm pretty good at getting in people's heads, but getting inside their feelings. So that was something I learned from novel writing, and what I learned from memoir writing. And the reverse is also true, that the structure of a novel in which you have to have, a situation, some sort of a crisis, and some sort of a resolution to make it at its most simple, also applies to a memoir if you'd like people to read it. Because what's interesting to me is that people are reading this knowing the ending.
Right.
And yet they're still whipping through it to find out, I guess, how we got there. But so yes, there are similarities between memoir and novel writing. But with memoir, what I also say is, don't let the facts get in the way of the truth, by which I mean, if I can't remember the exact time on a Tuesday afternoon when something happened, it doesn't matter. It's the thing that happened.
Right.
That's the key to the story. So yeah, they do rub off on each other, and I'm enjoying writing fiction now because I can make up characters, which is lovely.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, after writing a book like this and living that experience, there is liberation in being able to make it up. So let me ask you too, writing, as we all know, is a largely solitary endeavor. Can you tell us about the importance of either finding or even creating sort of a community of like-minded people, and how that can benefit not only the work, but sort of the emotional well-being of a writer? Because nobody understands a writer better than another writer.
That's exactly right. So about 7 years ago, the local Barnes and Noble here in Westport asked me, could I think of something they could do for writers? And I said exactly what you just said. Well, writing is kind of solitary. I wouldn't be surprised if people would like to come and sort of meet other writers and chat to them and just get away from their desks. And sure enough, I started doing that once a month, and people started to come. If you build it, they will come, kind of thing. And it's grown since then, and now it's on Zoom, because since the pandemic, we have had people coming from, Texas and Canada and all over the place, which is lovely. And so we get together, we talk, people give a little report on what they've been writing, how they've done, and then we ask advice from each other. Do you know anybody who's a good editor? Do you know somewhere I can submit my poem? Whatever it might be, we compare notes, and then we set ourselves a little tiny goal for something we should try to get done by next month. And what's amazing about that is that people come and they're a little bit all over the place when they first start coming. And eventually they're like, I'm published. Look, I got published. And that's lovely for me. I love to see that. And I find that they're not my writers, but my writing friends who do this get something out of it, and I get something out of them, because I don't feel so alone. And also, I know I've got friends to ask if I need advice about anything like that. And I think it's not quite the same as doing it online, as doing it in a Facebook group or something like that. There's more to it. We get slightly interested in each other's lives, not too much, but they are friends. And so I think it's extremely important. And it's not too difficult to start something like that. If you really want to do it, you can ask your library whether they'll let you have some space and start telling people that that's what you're doing, and voila.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, you were, an advocate of this, but you also sort of create these opportunities and put them together for people. You do a writer's mic, you do the Westport Writers Rendezvous, and you even do sort of a virtual write-in on Mondays. Would you mind speaking a bit more about that, and then telling people who are interested, how they can find a bit more about those opportunities if they would maybe like to join?
Yeah. Absolutely. So the write-in is a thing that people used to do by going to a library on a Saturday afternoon and just sitting there and writing with other people. And with the pandemic came the idea that we could still do that because nobody was going to be getting out for months. We could still do that. We could do it online. So when the Pequot Library asked me if I could think of something to do for writers, the Pequot Library is in Southport here. Could I think of something to do for writers during the pandemic? So I said, well, I could do this on a Monday morning. We'll do 45 minutes of writing, have a little stop, and then do another 45. And how will that be? And they looked a bit like, well, maybe she knows what she's talking about. It sounds weird. Nobody's talking. And what happens is, again, stuff gets done. And somebody told me that there is something about working in the company of other people who are also silently working that makes people more able to focus and get things done. And so people show up every Monday morning. It's at 10 o'clock Eastern time. And again, I have some people from other states who come. And they show up at 10 o'clock and we're mostly done by 11:45. And I love it because people are coming saying, I don't really know whether I can write. I just say, write badly. Just, you can fix bad writing. You can't fix no writing. So, and so if people are interested in that, they can email me at Gabi@GabiCoatsworth.com. So my name's on the screen here. And I'll be happy to put them on my list. And they don't have to come every Monday. They can come when they can manage it, or they can come a bit late if they want. It's fine. But it's a great way to start the week if you're a writer, because it really gets the writing juices flowing.
Yeah, how great is that? Simple but profound, and it gets results, obviously, which is terrific.
And I don't tell you what to write either, by the way. So if what you really need to do is some research for something, or if you need to work on a limerick for a contest or a children's book, fine, I don't care. As long as you're moving your writing forward, it's fine with me.
That's terrific. I love that. All right. So winding down, I do have to ask, I ask this of pretty much everybody because there are always, writers or aspiring writers tuning in who are looking for some words of encouragement or advice. You've already shared a lot, but let me ask you, in terms of a creative or writing life, what do you think is the best advice that you were ever given, and then the best advice that you were never given and had to learn for yourself throughout the process of actually doing the work?
So the best advice I was ever given was just write. And I know that sounds simple, but the fact is that it's fear of writing that gets in the way, usually, of people having a writing life. So don't be afraid of it. Just do it and set yourself a small goal. This is something that I learned for myself. Other people will tell you things like, you must write 2 hours a day or whatever. I'm like, no, if you can write 100 words a day, and by the way, 5 days a week, not 7, you're more likely to achieve that and do more. Whereas if you set yourself writing 2 hours every day and you do an hour and 59 minutes, you might feel like a failure. If you set yourself 15 minutes and you do 60, hooray, you're a success. So that's why I tell people to aim low.
I love that.
Aim low and exceed your expectations, which is quite contrary to some people's advice, which is aim high and keep going, because I always used to find that discouraging, failing to meet my high expectations. So aim low, write badly, just write.
That is terrific advice. I love it because I always tell people, set your expectations low and then you might be pleasantly surprised
Exactly.
by what happens. I think that's pragmatic, but it's also, it's really approachable for people,
Yes.
which is great. There's nothing intimidating about that. That's terrific advice. And final question, of course, you've told us all about what you've already written. So I'm wondering if you can leave us with a little teaser about what readers might expect next from you.
Well, I've got one finished novel that's going out to publishers now. So and that one is about a middle-aged widow whose friends want her to start dating again. And she's not very keen, but they put her onto an online site. And as she's looking at it, a voice from behind her says, "You can't go out with him. He's 70 if he's a day." And it's the ghost of her dead husband who's turned up. He's going to help her find a replacement that's not quite as good as him, and disasters ensue. And that resulted from my friend saying to me, "So are you going to start dating again?" And me replying, "No, men are such hard work." But anyway, so that novel is going out there, and I have been challenged to write a cozy mystery story.
Ooh.
By my agent, who says, could I think of something? And so, of course, since it's a very British thing, I'm giving it a shot, but I'm having to take a class, and I'm, because I really don't quite know what I'm doing. I never guess who the murderer is, not from the clues, so I need to learn how to do that. And it's good fun, having fun doing that. So we'll see if I can manage to do it. It'll be out there, but I'm hoping the novel will be published somewhere by next year. So
outstanding, and what a great premise. And the cozy mystery, yet another excuse to just have some strong English tea and enjoy it.
So right.
If you can enjoy your tea,
right. The English tea is it. Yes.
So if you're enjoying your tea and you're having fun with the writing, then you are sort of winning all the way around. So while people, wait for those projects, they can certainly pick up Love's Journey Home, which is available right now. Gabi Coatsworth, thank you so much for sharing with us. You are a delight and an inspiration.
It was a real pleasure, John. I was so happy to be here. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.